Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 51st episode of 2023, and I am super excited as today is our 4th episode of our Quantum series, sponsored by Qubitekk, in an effort to educate our audience on the amazing advancements of quantum technology and quantum network made possible by fiber broadband networks. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, and our gold sponsor, Network Connects. Also like to thank Qubitekk again for sponsoring our Quantum series. On Friday, NTIA announced that it has approved Louisiana's BEAD initial proposal, unlocking the first 20% of its $1.3 billion funding allocation. So congratulations, Vineet and Thomas and all our friends down in Louisiana. We held our first regional Fiber Connect workshop in Baton Rouge nearly 2 years ago. Nadir, can you imagine that was nearly 2 years ago? And it is amazing to see the tremendous progress that the Gumbo team is as they work to get every home and business connected with fiber in the Pelican State. The state BEAD initial proposals are due on December 27th, so that's a week from today. So get your proposals into NTIA, and the funding has begun, so start your engines. Speaking of 2024, our first regional Fiber Connect workshop next year will be on February 8th in Richmond. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, including our good friend Joey Wender from Treasury, who still has $1 billion left to spend on infrastructure, broadband infrastructure from Treasury's Capital Project Fund. So registration for Richmond is now open. So please register today, as this event will definitely sell out quickly. Our upcoming workshops after Richmond, we have Little Rock in April, Park City or Deer Valley, I guess, in June, Des Moines in September, Albuquerque in November, and don't miss our regional Fiber Connect Big Daddy conference in Nashville, July 28th to 31st, and that is going to be epic. Also, please join me this morning at 11 a.m. Eastern for the epic conclusion of Where's the Funding? It's been a great series as we've explored issues such as the 25% match and letter of credit. And today's final epic finale, I guess, will include Alex Buffett Rosette, the grandson of Warren Buffett's late sister, Doris. And Alex is the co-CEO and co-chairman of the Boston Omaha Corporation. And he also has he runs a rural broadband operation in Vermont. So I hope you'll join us here following this at 11 a.m. Eastern. That brings us today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Dr. Duncan Earl. He's a physicist and founder of Qubitekk, who's going to be discussing quantum technology and securing critical infrastructure and sensitive data. But before I formally introduce today's guests, let me introduce Nadir Noon from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning to everyone who has joined us today. Before I go over just a few of those logistical items, I just want to again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, as well as our gold sponsor, Network Connects, and of course, the Quantum Series sponsor, Qubitekk. Now, if you would all please keep in mind throughout the webinar, all participants are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located within your control panel on the side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find those recordings in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you will be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please do take a moment or two to do so. We really appreciate your input on these. Now I will go ahead and pass it back to Gary to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Nadir. I'm Gary Bolton, President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. And last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we had our great friend and research partner, Mike Render, who shared with us the latest numbers on fiber deployment. And no surprise, fiber posted another record, passing 9 more million homes in 2023, beating last year's deployment record of 8.3 million homes. So we're at 51% of the nation covered with fiber, and we will get this job done here in the next few years. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Dr. Duncan Earl, a physicist and founder of Qubitekk, who's going to be discussing quantum technology, securing critical infrastructure and sensitive data. A physicist, Dr. Duncan Earl is the founder of quantum networking company Qubitekk, and has spent nearly 20 years conducting energy and defense-related research and development at Oak Ridge National Laboratories in the field of quantum sources, quantum computing, and quantum cryptography. Today, Duncan's focus lies squarely in applying his findings towards building quantum networks and critical precursors to the upcoming quantum-enabled network. A nationally recognized pioneer in the field of practical quantum applications, Earl holds numerous patents and served on steering committees for organizations including QED-C and NIST, and frequently advises policymakers about quantum network solutions and to some of the country's foremost challenges. So welcome, Dr. Earl, and for audience, please type in your questions. I hope you guys have some really tough questions, because I love challenging Duncan. So let's get things rocking and rolling, Duncan, and I'll turn things over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gary, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak again this morning. Good morning, everyone. So this presentation today is really focused on how we secure sensitive data as we move into the age of quantum computers. It's a real challenge, which I hope to be able to share at least at a high level in this presentation. And it's also a challenge that I think the fiber broadband community may very well be asked to help solve. So from a national security challenge, the fiber infrastructure we have in the United States could potentially provide a solution to the problems that we're going to talk about in this presentation. To get there, it's a bit of a long walk. I got to talk about cryptography and I got to talk about quantum, but we'll eventually get to how the fiber infrastructure really is key to securing data in the future. So let's jump in. If we could, let's go to the next slide, and I'll give kind of a little quick history lesson on how we got to where we're at today with the cryptography that we use. So I think some may already know that today when you get on the internet and you use a credit card to purchase something, at the end of the day, what's securing those communications and that transaction is something called public key cryptography, and it's supported by a public key infrastructure, which usually goes by the acronym PKI, and that's what is securing a lot of these, the majority of communications around the internet. And the process we went through to get to a PKI solution that we now use is a really long one. It starts all the way back with mainframe computers in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Developing into desktop computers by the mid 1980s, and the vision that you could start to connect these desktop computers into a worldwide network just really became evident in the 1980s, and therefore the security challenges of doing that came to the forefront. And it's particularly hard to connect a network of computers in a secure way because everybody is not meeting each other. You know, when you're talking to somebody over the internet, it's not like you're having a face-to-face conversation where you can freely exchange security information. It's a much harder thing to do with so many unknown parties. But a really clever solution, the PKI infrastructure, was developed in the late 1980s to handle that security issue. And in 1989, the PKI framework, or at least some guidance on how to implement that type of infrastructure, which includes certificate authorities and digital signatures and lots of other components. That whole framework was really defined in the late 1980s, and by the middle of the 1990s, companies like Netscape were already implementing and using PKI, and now it's used everywhere. It's just ubiquitous. You don't even really notice it anymore. It's in the background protecting everything. And today, it's a very secure form of cryptography that we use with the internet. It was again preceded by the development of computers, and it was very much led by computers first before these techniques were put in place and the networks adopted them. That's going to be an important point I'm going to come back to, but at least this gives you a little bit of the history of how we got to where we're at. If we could, let's go to the next slide and look at what underpins public key cryptography. This, again, is a very high level, so I'm not diving into the details, and I am oversimplifying it, but you can kind of think of it as based on this idea of one-way functions. So once a computer had been developed and researchers were looking for a way to secure communications, they recognized that computers were really good at doing some problems in one direction, but bad in the other direction. And a very easy example to share is if you multiply two prime numbers together, you get a unique answer. And so if I multiply 5,953 times 7,919, even with a simple calculator, I can do that calculation very quickly. But if I turn that problem around and I say, I've got 47,141,807, and I know it's made by multiplying two primes, can we find those two prime numbers? That problem is actually a lot harder for a classical computer to do, especially when the number gets really, really big. It's got to go through many, many combinations to try and find out what the right answer is to this problem. So one-way functions are basically what underpins modern cryptography today, and definitely public key infrastructure. And it's based on assumptions we're making about how computers work and how quickly they can compute these types of one-way functions. So the problem is, what happens if a new computer comes along that makes that assumption no longer true? And if you've been following this quantum series, you know that there is a new type of computer, not just a faster computer, but fundamentally a different type of computer coming called a quantum computer, and it's threatening this basic assumption. So what happens when this new type of computer comes along? If we go to the next slide, not to exaggerate it too much, but they call it the cryptocalypse. so don't panic, but it is a pretty serious issue if we do develop these new computers and they can break the assumptions of the cryptography we use today. Sometimes the occurrence of the cryptocalypse they call Q-Day, because it's the day that quantum computers become fast enough to break these assumptions, or powerful enough to break these assumptions. Sorry, go ahead, next slide, please. So if you think about a quantum computer, just at a very simple terms, the reason it's a threat is because we do know for a fact that quantum computers can break some of these one-way functions, specifically the factorial function based on primes. There's already algorithms that have been developed. We've known about it for a while, and so this concern has been out there for a while. However, quantum computers have been accelerating in terms of their development. A week or two ago, 60 Minutes had a great overview on it, where people are really predicting in the next few years we're going to see powerful, game-changing quantum computers that are available commercially for others to use. Who knows what's available in the non-commercial space, but it becomes a big concern how quickly these computers are coming to the forefront. So we've got to be prepared to solve this cryptography problem because they are coming. Next slide, please. And we've had this problem before, but it actually kind of is a bigger issue this time around. So just like we developed classical computers, we're currently developing quantum computers. The problem is those computers, when they occur, they immediately cause our networks to become insecure. And so although we are trying to find newer algorithms that are difficult for quantum computers to solve and for classical computers to solve, it's not exactly clear if we can develop a quantum algorithm to run on these quantum computers to replace these one-way functions when we don't even yet have the computer. So the fact that the computer is coming first and these algorithms are being developed second, that worked the first time around, but the second time around, it's going to create this region or this period where we have insecure classical networks until we find the right algorithms. So that insecure period could last a year, 20 years, 100 years. We're not sure how long it could last, but everybody's hoping it won't last even a day, and we're betting that we can come up with these algorithms that are replacements for the ones we use today. That's being led by NIST. It's also part of the Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act that the White House announced last year to take all federal agencies and try and upgrade them as quickly as we can to post-quantum algorithms that we believe will survive a quantum computer attack, but we have no guarantee. So we're going through a transitionary period here where we could have very insecure networks as we try and resolve this issue. It's not even clear if we can come up with new algorithms given this new computer. Next slide, please. So it brings us to a question of, what are we going to do if we don't have these algorithms in place? And there fortunately is an alternative. It's called quantum key distribution, and it's available today. It's actually been around for about 20 years, and it can secure the network, but it's not based on mathematics. It's based on hardware and physics, and it requires fiber, which is why it's part of this series. It does require an investment in the fiber infrastructure to roll it out. Next slide, please. I'll try and speed this up a little here too, because I don't want to get down a rabbit hole with explaining it. But just at a very high level, what's happening is this is a method for producing cryptographic keys that is based on the randomness inherent in nature. It's not based on mathematics, it's really based on physics. And it leverages something called entanglement to securely distribute these keys between different parties. Because it's not based on mathematics, it's based on physics. It doesn't matter how fast your computer is, you can't crack this code, but you do have to have a way to deliver quantum particles to different parties, which means you have to have an optical fiber delivering something called entangled photons. And we're seeing this technique really take hold in Europe and Asia, but not yet here in the US. Next slide, please. So I won't have enough time to go into this really well, but fundamentally there's this property of quantum particles called entanglement that allows us to create secure keys between two parties, say an Alice and a Bob. And just really quickly, these are photons, entangled photons that get shared over optical fiber. But just to try and give you a feel for what's happening here, we can kind of describe it through entangled coins. So imagine that Alice and Bob each have a coin, and it's a special kind of coin called an entangled coin. And what that means is that Alice and Bob can flip these coins in their left hand and for their right hand, and every time they flip the coin, they get a random result. Sometimes it's heads, sometimes it's tails. But if Alice and Bob flip their coins using the same hand, let's say they both use the left hand or they both use the right hand, then every time they get a result, although it is random, it agrees between the two. So they might randomly flip it, but they're both going to get heads or they're both going to get tails, as long as they use the same hand to do it. That's kind of this entanglement property, and it seems almost magical that these two coins can have this correlated response, even though they're not communicating with each other. But that's fundamentally what these particles are doing, and every flip of the coin is another bit in the key that is known to only Alice and Bob. They don't actually have to share this information openly. Because they have this entangled particle, they can build these keys using this entanglement property. There's a lot of really great explanations online, so I'll have to just recommend those. They can give you a much better understanding of how this property works. Next slide, please. So because you need optical fibers to distribute these entangled photons to Alice's and Bob's, this is the type of solution that you would really want to roll out first for critical infrastructure, things like power grids, hospital systems, financial organizations. Obviously, the military is already looking at this some as well. So being able to at least secure our critical infrastructure as we go through this kind of tumultuous time in cryptography makes a lot of sense, and we're starting to see more and more people focus on critical infrastructure as the first step for quantum key distribution. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll make this kind of the last slide because I know I'm running out of time here, but where are we at today with this? If you really dig into quantum key distribution, this physics-based form of security, and you ask, is this taking hold? Who's investing in this? Is this really something that's coming? The answer is yes, but it depends on where you live. Today, numerous companies around the world are providing QKD products. They have for the past 20 years. It's a very well understood technology, and it's been productized. The QKD protected fiber optic networks are mainly in Europe and Asia, but they are quickly growing in those regions. Here in the United States, our government is still not convinced that this is the right approach, and so QKD adoption in the US has been pretty stagnant so far. A lot more emphasis on trying to go the mathematical route and find a post quantum computing algorithm that can survive. And again, that's led by NIST. And so quantum protected fiber networks in the US, you can see them. Qubitekk has built some, number of companies have done some demonstrations, but they're really just demonstrations. They're not yet really, commercial networks that are being utilized and secured using QKD. The emergence of commercial quantum networks that are general purpose, that could be used for quantum computing and for sensing applications, that could change it, because it does provide now an infrastructure for QKD to run upon. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that's going to advance QKD here in the US. But one thing that is definitely for sure is that there's a big question about whether or not the United States is maybe making a mistake by not investing in fiber infrastructure and preparing it with quantum key distribution equipment like they're doing in Europe and they're doing in Asia. And really in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to find out if that was a good decision or a bad decision, because again, this cryptocalypse is coming. If we are behind the 8 ball, it will be the fiber broadband industry that the government turns to say, how can we quickly get this infrastructure in place to catch up with Europe and Asia and make sure we have a secure network for the foreseeable future. So this is just a primer on the problem, just kind of laying the groundwork for what may be coming in the next few years. And I'll go ahead and stop it there and take any questions.
Well, Duncan, again, this is fascinating. So Q-Day, I mean, a year out, 5 years out, what 10 years? I mean, what's the horizon on that?
So, the old joke in quantum is it used to always be 20 or 30 years before a computer was going to be here. And of course, that just kept getting pushed out. But now, when you look at the 60 Minutes and presentation and the articles on quantum, really the leaders are talking about somewhere between 3 to 5 years for useful quantum computers. And that's in the public sector. So if you kind of multiply the capacity in the more classified regions of the world, then you can see that we're actually a lot closer to having a computer that could potentially break the cryptography today. So you're looking at probably 3 to 5 years before the concern gets to the point of panic, but that is very close. And in addition to that, you've got to develop and implement the solution. So if you're going to have a problem in 3 to 5 years, you kind of need to be implementing the solution, 5 years ago. So that's the real challenge.
So this is imminent, right? I mean, this is not fantasy. This is going to happen. So we're going to have Q-Day. And is PQA, this post-quantum algorithm, is that the holy grail? I mean, is that the kryptonite or what?
Yeah, if we can come up with a cryptography algorithm to replace the ones we're using today, that is definitely the most convenient solution. It works with wireless. It works with, all kinds of different technologies. NIST developed, they basically down selected to a small number of algorithms. Almost immediately, one of them got knocked out. They're quickly sort of finding out the staying power of these algorithms. So it's unclear whether or not the remaining algorithms are going to survive all the vetting and ultimately prove to be secure. But if they are, that is definitely the most convenient solution. It's just that's a lot of eggs in one basket.
And so one of the questions that came in is who's working on this? Who's going to solve this? And so you said NIST, and who else?
So NIST is really primarily the leader, and then they've, since the 80s, they've kind of led that cryptography development. Of course, they're pulling in academia, national labs, corporations, everybody to participate in the algorithm development. And at this stage, they've really, settled on a few of these key algorithms. But ultimately, that has to then be implemented and supported. You do need to have devices with sufficient computational power to run them, which is going to be really hard for critical infrastructure because they're already kind of only really able to run lightweight crypto. So there's challenges to the implementation side. We've got to vet these algorithms, implement them in environments where it's difficult, and do all that really in a very short time period. Everybody should be nervous about this. I hope that's one thing that you take away from this presentation, because it's a lot to do in a short period of time and a lot of risk.
I mean, if we have Q-Day, which it looks like that's a foregone conclusion. We're going to have Q day. Even if we don't have a post-quantum algorithm for a day, I mean, just a nanosecond, right? I mean, people would scrape all our data in fractions of a second.
Yeah, and the scary thing about and the scary thing about Q day is probably the way it will roll out is there will be an understanding that a quantum computer of sufficient strength to break our cryptography has been invented by some country, and how long they've had it, we won't really know. And so for whatever that period of time,
they'll do it quietly, so they'll start to steal everything, and then we find out that all our banks are drained in the economic collapse of the world.
Essentially, you'll have to assume everything is compromised, right? So that's kind of like the worst case scenario for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the questions came in that you might be able to answer is, how might a municipal fiber help? And maybe you could talk just a second about what you're working on with EPB.
Sure. So definitely municipal fiber, especially if it's tied in with some of the critical infrastructure in a city, like the electrical grid, that's a great place to start using this. In fact, Qubitekk worked with EPB in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to show that you could use quantum key distribution technology to secure electrical grid substations. So those are just, communications between distributed substations within a city. That's a great place to start, and that's where we've tried to really interject quantum key distribution into the U.S. Infrastructure at sort of the power grid level. However, cities can also build their own quantum networks, not just for security, but for economic development, to support quantum computing, quantum sensing, the quantum economy that is coming. Any of those quantum networks, they also can run the security as an application, if you will, and getting the fiber in the ground to support any type of quantum network is ultimately going to make our networks more secure.
And does the same apply to blockchain? I mean, is the whole crypto world going to come to a collapse when?
Yeah, the whole thing is like big old house cards. So yeah, Bitcoin and blockchain, all of that then is also vulnerable. So we really have based a lot on this one assumption that computers can solve problems in a certain way, and that assumption is about to be wrong.
So in 3 to 5 years, this whole thing's going to unravel unless we do something about this. And one of the questions came in is, about the NTI BEAD project. So right now, we got this $42 billion going to get fiber to every state and every house and business. What does the state need to do to be prepared, for this quantum future?
So this is definitely critical to laying the foundation right. I mean, that's the start, is just making sure we have classical fiber networks. Really, the more classical fiber networks we have, the easier it's going to be to transition. The transition from a classical fiber network to a quantum network is something that we're getting a much better understanding of how to do. I would say let's get the classical networks in first, and then slowly start transitioning those to support quantum activities.
Well, so Duncan, as always, amazing. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be able to sleep tonight. This is scary stuff.
We'll get it solved one way or another.
Well, this is when innovation comes, right? When we get a big, hairy problem, we need to solve it quickly. So thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing your expertise and knowledge and everything you're doing to really advance quantum networks and quantum security. So thanks, Duncan. And I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. And we're going to get back together next Wednesday, where our guest is going to be none other than Tom Cohen, the Fiber Broadband Association's Chief Regulatory and Legal Counsel, who's going to be discussing a year in review, a Washington recap. So if you haven't heard Tom speak, you're not going to want to miss this. So thanks, everyone. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again, Duncan.